Now that we have improved the model, it's time for us to start implementing the interfaces that will allow us to use MVVM. And we're going to start with the iNotify property changed, which is going to trigger events when a property value has changed. So the model and the view can stay updated when this happens. Let's talk about why to use the iNotify property changed. And there are two main reasons why we want to do this. And that is that when bound together, two properties will stay updated when either one changes. For example, the view can stay updated when values from the model, from the source, change. And this can happen both in one-way and two-way scenarios. If you remember, when we talked about MVVM, we talked about the data binding happening on three ways. One being one way that comes from the model to the view. The other one two-way, which goes both from the model to the view and from the view to the model. And one way to source, which goes from the view to the model. And that is what I mean by one way and two way. The second option of why to use the iNotify property changed interface is that the model can also stay updated when values from the view changes. Now this only happens when you set two-way or one-way to source as the binding mode. And don't worry, we're going to take a look at how to set that binding mode once we get our hands into implementing the interface. But let's also talk about how this works. The first thing is that the data model class has to implement the iNotify property changed interface. This interface is going to add an event to the class. Remember that when you implement an interface, all of its members have to be in the class that is implementing that interface as well. So the class now has to have this event. And any changes to a property have to trigger this event. This means that we have to trigger the event on the set of the property. Remember that the property has both a get and a set. And it is in the set that we have to trigger the event. And bound properties are going to respond to the triggering of this event. Here is an example. Let's think of a user class that has three properties: a name, an email, and a password. And by default, all of the three properties are assigned to an empty string. When we set the binding from each of these properties to, for example, entries, the values from these properties are going to bound to those entries. And right now I am thinking about a two-way scenario. So for this scenario, we have three entries. The first one is bound in a two-way mode to the name, the second one to the email, and the third one to the password. And the first time this happens, the entries are getting their values, their text values, from the values of the properties. Now, if the user were to type something inside of the entries, these values are going to be directly assigned to the properties of the object, because we're setting a two-way mode. So there's no need for us to, from code behind, access the values from the entries, because this is already happening thanks to the binding settings and to the iNotify property changed interface that is notifying about changes to the values of a property. And the same happens the other way around. If I change the value from one of the properties, for example, adding the last name to the name property, these will automatically update the view as well. So now that we have talked just a little bit about the iNotify property changed interface, and how it's going to allow certain properties to know when that value has changed, in the next lecture, we're going to implement the interface into some of our classes.